couldn't have asked for a better panelist. You know, this is stellar panel that we have today. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this, Mr. Jejurikar, Mr. Puri, and Mr. Gupta. You know, first up, I mean, the panel doesn't really need a lot of introduction in that sense. You know, building global MNC brands out of India, that's become so critical to a lot of large businesses today. So first up, if each of you can just talk about, in your opening remarks on what the group's global businesses are, and the kind of products and the kind of geographies that your global businesses for the interest of audience. That would be great. Mr. Jejurikar.
Thanks, Neha, and hi, everyone. Thanks for being here on a weekend, and a long weekend that too, so appreciate your presence. So I represent the automotive and farm equipment business of Mahindra, and our global business is about $1.5 billion a year. So we are fairly large in an absolute revenue sense. We are also very represented in where we play. So we have a large business in North America, and we can talk about that later. In Japan as well. So Japan came through an acquisition. North America was organic. We also have a couple of companies in Turkey, in Finland. So all of these, all these three came through acquisition as well. When we think about our global business, it's a combination of organic and acquisitions. It's a combination of what we call on-ground and distributor models. So we have both. And we have house of brands. So we have some countries we sell as Mahindra. In most countries, we've kept the acquired brand. So in Turkey, we acquired our contractors. We've retained the brand. In Japan, we sell as Mitsubishi. So we've retained the brand there. So it's a combination of all of these, and look forward to talking in more detail about some of these, the learnings coming out of some of these businesses.
Thanks. Thanks, Neha, and thanks, Rajesh. Good afternoon, everybody. At Pidilite, Neha, we have a very simple philosophy. We want to be an emerging markets multinational. By an emerging markets multinational, what we are really doing is a simple one-line strategy. Perfect your model in India, get it right in India, and then go to India-like markets and replicate the same model. About 10% of our sales, or a little more than 10% of our sales now comes from outside India. Again, it's a mix of both acquisition and growing. We have 8 plants now outside India. The lovely thing is, and I think this is something that will please the audience, the brand Fevicol is now available in over 80 countries.
Yeah, I think we have a similar approach on emerging market multinational. I think we have defined Asia and Africa because we believe LATAM is little far and language. And so we started our journey sometime in 2007. Today, around 27% of our top line comes from there, and actually it's equally profitable. And I think we have also approached it somewhere similar to Pidilite. We believe whichever country has a young population, headroom for growth in penetration, headroom for growth in per capita, and has an operating model which is unorganized and organized, and perhaps a little bit of chaos, because that's where Indian managers thrive in. And we therefore avoid developed markets where the cost of entry and exit and entry barriers are high. And so we have been doing that, partly organic, partly inorganic. But I believe that inorganic can be only a multiplier, can't be an escape button, not developing organic capabilities.
Right, that's very interesting. So what was the real trigger? When did the group really decide to step overseas? Because we see that it was a large business in India. So if each of you can talk about the triggers when the group decided to go to the overseas market, that would be great.
If I go back in time, Sneha, I think the big significant move was getting into North America. That was 30 years back. So 30 years back, we started a tractor business in North America. And at that time, it was started organically. So we didn't go the path of appointing a distributor. We started with saying North America is important. And we created an on-ground presence. Today, we have 3 plants in North America. We're probably the largest Indian consumer brand in North America. We sell as Mahindra. We sell to American farmers. They're called hobby farmers because we play in the less than 100 horsepower category. but they're all local, so we've really built a business there which connects directly with consumers. We have a local advertising agency. All the campaigns are very American and appeal to the local audiences. So everything is done there. Marketing is done from there. We don't control anything from here.
Right. Mr. Puri, what was the trigger for the group?
Sneha, for us, the triggers were two really. Trigger number one was obviously the neighboring countries. In the good old days, before things were much more controlled, you had a lot of overflow of advertising. You also had a lot of informal connect. I still remember, of course, in another life when I went to Burma and I told somebody that, listen, this Indian product, I'm sorry, you can't get. And the next day they went across to Manipur, got it and showed, listen, I can get it when I want. So the whole thing is, there was already this informal connect that existed and therefore you were just satisfying that. The other was the Indian diaspora. See, the Indian diaspora, the good thing is, if you look at all of East Africa, the trade, the industry is Indian. And fascinatingly, in the winter season, a lot of them all still come to get married here. And a lot of them would then see these Indian brands on and believe that, why can't, that's how we went to Kenya, that's how we went, in fact, to lots of countries in Africa. We now have plants in Kenya, we have a plant in Egypt. So it was the Indian diaspora. And we'll talk about how you become successful there, but the trigger was really, you had a good brand, people were seeing it, asking for it, and you said, listen, let's go and experiment.
No, that's a great point. Followed the diaspora. Mr. Gupta, how did Marico decide to go overseas?
So again, some of our brands were being purchased by the Indian diaspora. You can even go to, say, Patel Brothers in Chicago and buy your product, okay? And they are available through the normal channel these days. Earlier, maybe it was going. So we started off with South Asia and Middle East, North Africa, because that's where the significant portion of Indian diaspora was. But clearly, we understood that we have certain capabilities which are there, and we believe that we have an equally right to win. Now, sometimes what happens is some of your categories or habit might not be a global habit. So then we had to pick up some other categories in certain markets to get a foothold. But I believe that we firmly believe that Indian companies with developed unorganized trade or general trade capabilities have a significant right to win in most of the emerging markets in Asia and Africa.
Right. Mr. Jejurikar, you spoke about organic and inorganic. If you could, talk a little more about how critical it is, because most founders, and especially the new age founders, always face this dilemma of build versus buy. So how does a group really decide as to in which market would you be best suited to go the inorganic way, or build something ground up?
Yeah, so I'm just going to split the response, breaking it the farm equipment separate than the auto business, and we followed two different strategies. So in the auto business, there's no question of acquisition. I mean, there are no small regional players you can acquire. You have to go organic. So our auto strategy is completely organically led, and we have a presence in South Africa, for example, where we do very well. We have an on-ground presence in Australia, New Zealand. So these are right-hand markets. Then we presence in left-hand drive markets, which is in markets like Chile. That's through a distributor model. So on the auto side, there's really no path to acquisition. On the FES side, there was a path to acquisition. So example, in Turkey, we acquired our contractors, which was the number 4 player with about 7% market share. Very strong local brand. It would have been very hard for us to go organically there in a market where there were already 8 well-established players to try and build starting from zero, right from building a network. So, and Turkey is amongst the top 5 tractor markets in the world. So it made sense to do an acquisition. Likewise, in Japan, we were already doing business with Mitsubishi, and they wanted to exit the ag machinery business. So we took a controlling stake there, and the company is called Mitsubishi Mahindra, but we kept the Mitsubishi brand there, obviously, because it connects very well in the local Japanese system. These have been two kind of interesting acquisitions which have scaled up. In US, like I said, we were there 30 years back. Brazil was an interesting case. So Brazil, we actually acquired our distributor who wanted to exit and converted that into Mahindra Brazil. And today we're doing actually very well in Brazil. We're setting up a new plant. We acquired a small one, but we're setting up a new plant. And we've actually got 5% share of the less than 110 horsepower market within the last 3-4 years of investing there. We do Mahindra brand. We get higher horsepower tractors from Turkey, but we brand them Mahindra in Brazil. So Brazil, we have a local Brazilian leader who leads it. So that's an acquisition route too. Mexico, we went in through a company, but we converted it into a distributor model because their volume wasn't enough to justify the effort of keeping a company going. So on the tractor side, we've done a lot of growth through acquisitions because it was possible. You could find local players whom you could acquire, and that gave you an ability to get a ramp up. But we also, all the neighboring countries, for example, we export. We don't have an on-ground presence. We are now going to go to ASEAN, which is mainly starting with Thailand. There we're going to do on-ground presence. We're not going through distributor model. We're going to go to Europe, which we haven't been on the tractor side. Again, we'll have to figure out the model that we get in there. So on the tractor side, we've looked at acquisitions. On the auto side, it's all organic.
Right. Mr. Puri, is it, because the growth in the local market, of course, because the consumption pattern in India is such, and there's a huge market to cover, but, how do you really decide to go overseas, in the debate of build versus buy? What does Pidilite choose?
See, on build versus buy, Sneha, I'll answer the second part first. All Indian companies have gone through a stage of evolution. See, post 91, when liberalization happened, first time companies realized, founders realized that you could actually buy assets with Indian cash. So there was a certain amount of excitement, and as long as it was in your category, you went and bought because there was this whole, piece around suddenly becoming an international company. It's as markets evolved, so on and so forth, strategies evolved, you realize that, listen, you need to have a strategy that underpins this. Just being in the same categories is not enough, consumer, so on. And to my mind, whenever you buy anything, you acquire anything abroad, you will acquire it for one of three reasons. Either it is a very strong brand, or it has a great route to market, or it has technology that you don't have, or a combination of any of these three. As long as two of these three conditions are met and the value is right, you would acquire. Otherwise, hopefully, you will build. In our case, it's been a mix of both. And actually, frankly, both have been successful, but you've obviously evolved and understood. But the trigger has never been that, hey, listen, India's growth is low. As far as I can see, and the eye can see, the India runway is a long runway, and, India has to remain the focus of your attentions. A lot of times I will remind my investors and even my teams, look at a lot of these countries like states of India. I mean, you look at Africa, for example. They would be akin to now, I don't want to be politically incorrect and say that this is like the, Nigeria is like what state and Ghana is like what, but they're like states of India. And therefore, if you can replicate your India model, hopefully with local manpower, which, today, for example, at Pidilite, we have over 100 people based in Africa. Despite all of the problems for us, Africa is growing substantially because we see it as a future growth market and a market where we have a right to win simply because, and I say this bluntly, the Europeans are not patient enough to build markets in mom and pop stores. They would like to go to large organized trade, go to the large one or two big players, go to the big projects. We are going mom and pop store onwards, etc., and building a retail business, and we find that's a great right to win. So really a combination of, therefore, hey, do you have a right to win? Is it the right value? And does it, in a sense, are you not reinventing the wheel? Wherever you fail abroad is when you try and do something outside India which you've never done in India. No. That can't be a, learning ground, in our view, should be India.
Right. Mr. Gupta, there's this thing about trying the homogeneous markets first, what we consider the Southeast Asia, the South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa to a certain extent is considered more homogeneous to what the Indian experience has been. So, what is your thought on that? Whether, companies try out homogeneous markets first before venturing into the other territories?
So obviously the right to win increases if it is similar category. As the further you go for the core, I think when you get into a new country, new category, your right to win progressively decreases so that you far away from your adjacency, So obviously wherever you replicate the model, for example, the Bangladesh model where we started far ahead of a lot of companies, and today we are a very, very big player in Bangladesh, is because we just replicated the India model. And therefore but then as we acquired a little bit of confidence, for example, in some of the categories we operate in, like in Vietnam, we don't operate in shampoo here, but we are one of the market leaders in shampoo, in male shampoo in Vietnam. Now we slowly creating that category and getting an expertise in that category, and therefore replicating it in other markets. But you're right that having said that, I think what we also followed is a local strategy. Unlike a global multinational, we have not replicated a mix ready-made, but actually we have tweaked it a lot from our, so therefore our consumer inciting, our marketing is somewhere local. It's a mix hybrid as opposed to a kind of a global plan. And that's actually worked in some of these markets.
Right. It is interesting that Mr. Gupta and Mr. Puri both spoke about right to win. Mr. Jejurikar, how are Indian brands really perceived in the overseas market? What is the kind of reception do we get?
Sneha, it's the starting assumption is Indians don't know how to make automobiles or vehicles of that kind, and we don't have an Indian diaspora except for some neighboring countries. So especially on the tractor side, you have to sell to locals. On the automotive side as well, we don't. Most of our customers are local, even in African markets like South Africa. Where there are Indians, we find it's the locals who are buying us, not so much the Indians. So we really have a key part of going into a country for us is to build the brand. We build the brand around our product strengths with a fair amount of above the line input, which is why we don't go into too many markets where we invest. In some markets, we go through distributor model where the distributor is investing. But where we are getting into a market, then we are committed to build brand there, because without that, you can't really get acceptance. India is not known to be an automotive brand hub. But increasingly, as we are now creating world-class products, both on the tractor side and on the auto side, the acceptance of India as an automotive brand, I think, is growing. Certainly, we are seeing very good feedback on Scorpio N in markets like South Africa or Australia, New Zealand with 700. So, the so-called Western world usage markets are accepting Indian products now and connect to the fact that Indians can make really good products. So, both Bharat and Saugata spoke about you have to succeed well or do well in your Indian markets, and that's absolutely true in our case as well. To be able to build a global brand or a global business, if you've not built that capability and competence to succeed, or the right to win in the Indian market, you're not going to succeed globally. So you have to make sure that you have all the fundamental building blocks to fight global competition. And the best place to have experienced that is in India. In India, for example, now that we're able to, we are at the top of the SUV ladder in the Indian market, fighting the best of global brands, gives us confidence that we can do this around the world.
Right. Mr. Gupta also spoke about, you wouldn't want to try out something you've already, tested well in the Indian market. But when it comes to automobiles, that is one sector. If you're acquiring something overseas, you would want to bring that technology back home, So what has your experience been in that sense? If you could speak a little more about that, expanding the portfolio through global expansion.
Yeah, Sneha, these are two important considerations for us. One is when we are going into global markets, sometimes they have emission technology ahead of what India needs. So you're starting to invest in technology before the Indian market needs it. So when it comes in India, you're fully ready. Like on the tractor side, we're just moving to TREM 4 on more than 50 horsepower, just moved to. TREM 5 may come 2 to 3 years later, but Turkey's already moved to TREM 5 or moving, just about moving. So we are ready with TREM 5 because of Turkey. We have the capability to bring that back here. We're actually testing that. So in our case, we have no choice but to test. And that's actually very good for us because, we are building technology capability ahead of the curve of what's needed in the Indian market. And we can bring that back to India. So for us, it actually helps us to push ourselves to develop a level of technology for global markets which can come back to India.
Right. Mr. Puri, how is it for Pidilite? Because it has a completely different, business, and you're so well established in India itself. So, when you are expanding overseas, what is the consideration? Is it only the market that you are going after, or is it also the technology? If at all you're doing inorganic.
See, on Indian brands, Sneha, things have also changed. I remember in my initial days wearing another hat. When you went to the Middle East initially, and I remember those days I was with Asian Paints, they would just say Hind Mafi. The moment you came from India, there was somebody, they had some story where somebody had pulled the wool over their eyes and they didn't want, Hind was Mafi. I remember at Cadbury, now Sri Lanka was part of my territory when I was running Cadbury India. The Sri Lankans would say, listen, my Sri Lankan guy doesn't want the Indian Cadbury, he wants the Australian Cadbury. If he sees it made in India, he feels it's not as good as the Australian Cadbury. So, from there onwards, things have obviously changed. As an Indian brand, you don't have the natural, for example, you say I'm a German brand, there's already a halo built around you. Unfortunately for us, hopefully over time it will change. We don't have that halo. So, you have to work a little harder. At Pidilite, we have a very simple success formula. What we do is we spot an unserved, underserved category. Normally, we look at upgrading it, but we upgrade it not with a product, but with a brand. We will create the brand, and then we will work tirelessly both with consumers and users until we create the category. And I must say, most other organizations, competitors, like say, for example, in Africa, most of our competitors are either Turkish or Chinese. They do not have the patience to work with, say, the carpenter or the mason. Now take, Saugi spoke about Bangladesh. We were not the first into Bangladesh. We were actually the fifth into Bangladesh. There were already fellows there manufacturing. We did the same Indian formula. We went with the Fevicol brand, we priced it higher, we said it, we proved it's better quality. We took 2 to 3 years where we kept at it, worked with carpenters. Today in Bangladesh, we have the same market share, the same position and same profitability as India. So it's like over time you have to believe in your model. The wonderful thing is, just anecdotally, last year I went to Bangladesh and the immigration officer asked me, sir, why are you coming here? And I said, I've come to see our factory here. We were actually inaugurating our second factory because the first was out of capacity. He says, well, where do you work? And I said, Fevicol. He played the whole Fevicol ad to me. The immigration officer actually related the whole ad in this thing, and that was his familiarity with the brand. So it's really, you have to stay the course, have the conviction that you've got the ability to do it, and over time you will.
Mr. Gupta, what is the reception for Indian brands?
So, one interesting thing is that, at least I'll give you a story in Middle East, and thanks to Bollywood and everything, I think Indian hair, for example, is seen as the best quality hair. So, actually we don't have a problem, and fortunately, for example, in Middle East and Egypt and all, hair oiling is a habit, and not only us, but there are other players in this one, and it's a very large scale market. So I think Indian brands are now accepted well. I don't see a issue, and as I said, that there are two trends. One is natural and herbal and Ayurvedic, and of course when it goes via, like for example, yoga and turmeric latte are good examples. It goes via West and comes, we also start accepting and think it's very, but I think there is a significant growth towards naturals. There's a significant acceptance that Indian hair and this one is good. So we don't see a problem in most of the markets. And I think the other advantage is that if you look at Africa, most of the distribution trade is actually controlled by Indians. So there is no issue about that these brands are known. So I don't see an issue there. Obviously, and we don't work in developed markets, but if you really look at some of the Indian brands today, some of the digital brands for, D2C brands, whether it comes to, I can name some Vadam tea or some of the other brands in personal care, it has made significant, this one on Amazon and other, you will go to Whole Foods, you will see some of the brands available, Indian brands available. So I think Indian brands are far more acceptable today than what it was 15, 20 years ago.
Also, does the entire digital, digitization really help brands like you? Because there's this D2C wave that has started. Does that help you go global easier?
Yeah, I think absolutely. So if you look at some of our brands, like where we have a stake, some of the strategic like Plix, whether it's Just Herbs and all that. And now there's obviously, because Amazon has a significant presence here, they have a stake in promoting some of the Indian brands. Global e-commerce is, it's showing really exponential growth. And what e-commerce does, what it has done in India, it somewhere decreases the entry barrier for brands to come in. And that's exactly what has happened in India. For earlier distribution, for example, was a big entry barrier. Now e-commerce reduces that entry barrier because it gives you that space to enter. So I think it's been a fantastic experience in some of the, and today e-commerce is not only, whether it's in Southeast Asia, whether in Middle East and the developed country, it's a big channel, significant channel for brands to enter.
Right, definitely. By now it is established, the opportunity is huge, by going global, but I'm sure there are challenges also. There are teething troubles when you enter a new market. So Mr. Jejurikar, if you can also talk about, what are the challenges of building global brands, when you enter newer markets, and how do you really overcome those challenges? The softer issues.
Yeah, so there's some soft issues and some hard issues. I think this was the softer issues. The softer issue, main one, I think, is getting the right team and the right leadership in place. And we've kind of, struggled between what's the mix of Indian expats we should have there versus, what's the local, how much local, do we need an Indian leader as the CEO or a local leader? So we've gone through all of that, and I don't think there's any one right answer. What the most important thing is to have the right leader. Whether the person is local or you have someone really good from your team, you can expatriate there. I think the second thing is getting the right level of synergy between the local international entity and your company in India. If you try to drive too much synergy, you lose the local feel. So what's the right level of synergy, and how do you make that work with a set of people who have not grown with the Mahindra DNA, and they're new into you because they've come in through an acquisition, they're sitting in very distant lands, so whatever, like maybe Finland, Brazil, Japan, and how do you get that going? So I think that's, to me, one of the key softer issues that we've grappled with as we go international. The second is how much of your product development do you do locally and what do you do here, and how do you get that balance right? So I think these become two, the softer issues. On the harder issue, it is getting your local tie-ups or partnerships in place. Example, financing. That becomes a very important barrier as you're going into a new country. You need to get a finance package for customers and your dealer network in place. And that takes time because you're new, you may be new or you may not be known. And the risk-taking of the financier with you becomes a bit of a challenge. So that's, I think, one of the key things as we go into international markets. Of course, then when you're exporting, there's the foreign exchange volatility, as we were talking earlier, is just totally crazy. So, how do you prepare to manage in a situation where there's so much foreign exchange volatility?
Right. Mr. Puri?
See, if you want to be an emerging markets multinational, you have to understand that these are called emerging markets for a reason, right? They're not stable. There will be, some of them are not emerging, but submerging markets, right? You have to have the patience to see this through, and you have to be clear that you're in this for the long run, and they're going to, for example, when I take an Africa budget, whatever you add, you actually divide it by 25% because there will be 2 countries that are going to take a dunk, right? Now, that's part of the game, and you have to, learn, therefore, and if you take the old multinational approach of your budget is what it is, and if you don't, then life is over, then you'll never succeed in these markets. On the other softer issues, the issue of building capability in these places and investing in capability, this mix of local and Indian, when some of us have been part of multinationals, we've cribbed about the multinational telling us everything right from whether it is a Chicago or a London. We have to also be conscious we are not doing that from Mumbai now to our own fellows, etc. And how do you make that balance? I mean, I just had a meeting of my Africa team, and it was wonderful, to see the debate. There's a Senegalese, there's somebody from Congo, there is Cameroon, there's a lady manager from Algeria, and they're doing this with a sense of ownership. So, to my mind, getting the right team, being patient, but working hard on the ground. If you are looking for instant next quarter results, this year results, please don't do it. It's not going to happen. But if you are looking for the long term over time, I mean, I can tell you that for us, we are clear in the next 3 years, Africa will be 500 crores for us. Now, if instead of 500, it's 400 because Nigeria went under or, you know, South Africa, something high, that's fine. But as long as your graph is in the right direction, over time, these will be fixed deposits that will pay as India has done over time.
Right, so stay resilient and on course. But Mr. Gupta, we spoke backstage about the softer issues. You know, if you could talk about those, you know, while going into newer markets, what are these?
See, I think one of the things is to build capability and talent, and when is the right time, the balance between, you know, centralized control. There are 3 stages. There is centralized control, there is interdependence and independence. Now that journey you have to go along, and I think we have had a challenge of also sometimes that I think Indian managers succeed globally. On certain places there is a cultural fit. The reason we do so well, Indian professionals do well in US is culturally we are similar in terms of hard work, entrepreneurship, straight in your face, although I must say the Indian leaders are still shy of giving direct feedback, which is, you know, but...
And of saying no.
Huh?
I must tell you, you know, when you, first time you go abroad as an international manager and you look at Indians, the 2 things with Indians is we find it very hard to say no, and there are these 3 magic words that we very seldom say, which is I don't know.
Yeah. I think, so culturally there are certain nuances, and therefore one of the things we are now do is a significant cultural induction. And especially we have found it in Southeast Asia and Africa, because it's the same issue perhaps we face in Western multinationals, India, they face with Indian leaders, you know, in terms of certain issues there. The second thing is that how do you, the challenge in terms of how much we call it Mariconization, that how much the pace of Mariconization, especially for, you know, acquired entities, in the sense that what all processes you will do, because you have to synergize processes, but at the pace in which, and in terms of for example, I mean, to give you a simple thing, I mean, in India, I believe that in today, if you are a leader, you are not playing golf, you are in contact sports, so you are 24/7 on. But in certain cultures, respect for time and respect for personal space is completely different. I mean, Saturday morning calling is, what is the number like today? We are ending March, as you know, so obviously you have to make those calls. But in certain cultures, it's still not on. So I think those nuances, capturing that, and how do you do it? And as Bharat said, that in emerging markets, the anarchy, or volatility is so high, you have to, you know, play that way. And therefore, I think you need people who are willing to balance both.
Right. That's very interesting. I think we have right enough time to take a couple of audience questions, and if anyone in the audience wants to ask. Yeah. Can we get Sir a mic, please? Please introduce yourself before asking the question.
Yeah, hi, very good afternoon. This is Shivram Pandey. This question is for all the 3 panelists. In fact, I'm very happy to see a non-IT kind of panel sitting out there and taking the story global. How did you actually manage this whole perception of quality issue? Because see, and this has been talked quite widely when you go out of India and also here, and the standards are very high in terms of quality, and it could actually be that, or even perception for that matter. So that's one part of the question. The second part of the question is how much of your revenues are from outside India, and what is holding us from getting to the next level? Is it so much of domestic focus, or are there other challenges globally that you see which is kind of holding us from getting to the next level? Thank you.
Yeah. So I alluded to the quality question a little bit earlier. So it does take time, but you have to be sure that the products you're getting out there are really good quality products. It takes time because irrespective of what you say, it's going to be word of mouth that gets you know, built up in our category. There is a lot of influencer groups and specialist expert platforms. So if you have a quality problem, it's going to spread very quickly across the community. So, but if you have a good quality product, then the reverse works for you. because the ability to, now get viral content going based on positive influencer groups helps you build if your product is good. So it's easier and faster these days compared to when it was there earlier. On your other question on share, we are at about maybe 8% of our total revenue. We have to keep in mind that India is growing 15-20%. So, when you do a percentage of total revenue, we are in domestic markets which are growing very rapidly. So when you're growing very rapidly in your domestic market, your percentage of exports or global to total is going to be a little bit, it's not that easy to achieve. At least from our standpoint, we are looking at when we get our electric SUV portfolio out next year, we think that's a really big opportunity for us to go truly global. It is a very, very globally competitive, developed product portfolio. And we would look at, and India, you don't have a baggage of brands that EV customers are looking for. They are happy to look at new brands which are tech-led in the EV space, and we think we have a great chance to leapfrog into the global markets, in auto especially, with the EV portfolio.
Right, that's very interesting. Mr. Puri?
See, for us, our international portfolio is now between 10 and 15% of sale. We're, as far as expanding at a pace is concerned, in most cases, we're finding, especially Africa, etc., that you will have to build organically because you're replacing exports from China or Turkey or places like that. In fact, one of the greatest compliments we just got in Africa is right now, artificial fake product of ours, lookalikes, made in China have appeared, like, the Fevicol brand made in China is actually being now sold, which means we are obviously popular enough in Africa that the Chinese want to replicate us in China and like sell it as like a fake. Obviously, we are taking action. The issue really is, as we acquire scale, as we find the right, inorganic opportunities, and as I said, the brand, route to market, technology and value questions, you get a tick in 3 of the 4. We will we're not short of cash or capability. Management bandwidth always remains an issue because, like we just exited Brazil, not because Brazil is not an attractive market. It's just, if you want to manage Latin America, either you have a very sizable presence and manage it from Latin America. It's very difficult to manage it from India on a consistent basis, and we felt that we are not giving it enough attention. We'd rather focus on Africa, Asia, Middle East, where we've got a very strong presence, and do that maybe in stage 2.
Yeah. So I'll be short because time's up. So we have around 26 to 27% of the top line, around 30% of our profits come from international business. I would second Bharat on that. See, ultimately, India is our home market is an invest to grow market. A lot of multinationals, West-based, there's saturation in their market. So therefore, it will be an and strategy. And I believe there are 3 resources which are scarce. One is management bandwidth. Number 2 is talent and people, which is human talent, and the third is capital. Now, we have to judiciously allocate that, and therefore, as long as there is a opportunity and a growth, I think it has to be a measured growth. I think it's important, and I think the adversity and the volatility which is there in a lot of markets continue to stay, and India is an extremely stable market with a huge headroom for growth. So therefore, I think it will continue to expand in both the markets.
Thank you. With that, we'll wrap up the session. Thank you so much. Such diverse businesses and stellar panel. Thank you so much, Mr. Jejurikar, Mr. Puri, and Mr. Gupta for making time. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Sneha.